now this is interesting to me because some bad actors think they're good. And I mean, truly do, in their hearts, think they're good. They say, I'm doing this for the good of the company.
Oh, I think all of them do.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd be able to do it if they didn't think they were good and they were doing the right thing. It's just, I think their perception of it is skewed for whatever reason.
That's right. And so again, if you can have a conversation around this, I actually saw this with a CEO. It was the CEO of the organization. And he was doing things that most people around felt was not the direction we wanted to take this organization. And as a board member, and again, you have to sometimes remind yourself you're ultimately responsible for that person. This is the only connection you have directly to the organization that you're legally and morally responsible for. You better be thinking about this a little harder. But he was well liked as a human being, right? So, and isn't that often true? People can be very likable, very nice, give their relatives money, all sorts of nice things about them, but that doesn't mean that they're behaving in a way that collectively you see. So taking and having to remind each individual director on a board that they personally have a moral and legal responsibility. You can't do the collective, kind of thing. Everybody else decided it. You have to do it individually. And we ultimately did, and I think it was the right thing. And I had the great pleasure of having to be one of the people that explained to him why, and having to say, you know what, if it was a likability contest, you'd win, but you're not doing what we are saying this organization should be doing.
What's the difference between ethics, morality, fairness, and legality? How often do these concepts play a role in our leadership decisions? How often should they? And what can leader managers like us actually do about these issues in our day-to-day work lives? To discuss those questions and hopefully some answers to them as well, I'm joined by my guest today, Michelle Causton, a firm believer in the power of communication and ethical leadership. Michelle has dedicated herself to promoting these values throughout her career, which began in public accounting before her passion for education led to a second career, if you like, as a university and college professor. And today, Michelle is a speaker and member of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, sharing her passion for topics like communication, ethics, leadership, and more. So it is an absolute pleasure to welcome her to Leading with Integrity today.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Michelle, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show. Looking forward to our conversation today. It's been a couple of weeks in the making, hasn't it? But we're here finally. So.
Exactly. I am so glad to be here. It's delightful to be talking to you.
Well, likewise, and it's lovely having you on the show. So to start us off, over to you, really, to tell the listeners a bit about your background, your career so far, what you do today, what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Oh, my. Well, let's see. We only have an hour, so I'll see if I can contain myself here. But I'm Michelle Causton. I am an accountant. I am a retired professor from the universities and colleges in Ontario. And I talk about ethics. So, this is not an easy topic because no one wants to talk about ethics. They're pretty sure that they are good people, and so am I, actually. Most of us are. They don't want to talk about it because their exposure to it has been theoretical, and they don't see any practical applications. And they say, it's really simple in my life. I just do the right thing because they are good people. And I think, yeah, that makes sense. But I've experienced in my work with students and teaching and on boards and in business that sometimes we aren't behaving as ethically as we think we are. And that's simply because we don't know how to apply the filters. So I really want to help people join the conversation, be able to talk about it in a non-threatening, non-judgmental way and really integrate it into their thought processes. And that really does get me up in the morning, David. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, you're right. So many people, it's kind of, you rather not think about it. You just sort of, we know we're good people, and that's all we need to know. But I think it's an interesting area of crossover, I think, particularly with leadership. And I think what's really interesting as well is having a background as an accountant and then now finding yourself being very passionate about ethics. And I'd love to know if those two facts are related at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a really great example because, and certainly there's been a few ethics scandals, shall we say, where auditors and accountants suddenly find themselves going, oh my gosh, what have we done? And I realized the work environment I was in and the things that we took for granted. And again, I'm not saying anyone was doing anything fraudulent or nefarious. I'm saying that we were often doing things that in hindsight, you think, really, was that really the way to approach things? And so as I refined my own way of looking at these things, and trust me, we all still make mistakes. I do not have a halo on. But as I started to refine it, I started thinking about it differently. And so I think for leaders, and especially ones that are coming up and have lots of time to really integrate these things into their life, it's just absolutely critical.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree with that. I think, yeah. So one interesting thing I think would be good to pick into a little bit is maybe like the differences and the similarities between concepts. So ethics and morality, for example, because it's possible, I think, in terms of if you're following the letter of the law, and I think maybe the accountant and the financial function, this is quite relevant there. You could be following the letter of the law. You could be doing nothing wrong, in inverted commas, legally, and yet still maybe not being quite ethical, maybe not being quite moral in the way that you're doing things.
You really nailed it. You see, that's one of the problems in a lot of the professions, quite honestly, is that we are rule bound. And so we feel very confident that when we're into a gray, murky area, we go to the policies, procedures, our own code of conduct and ethics. And then we say, okay, good, I followed the rules. But there's lots of examples where following the rules isn't exactly the best thing or the most ethical thing to do. And I think some of us then suffer a little bit because we go, I didn't really like that, but good thing is I followed the rules. And there's just, if I can say, there's three ways to be wrong. There's three ways to be wrong in ethics. And one is, if it's against the law or a rule or a policy, anything kind of formal, we know it's wrong. But as you alluded to, it can be okay by that and still not right morally. So it's one of the ways to be wrong is just breaking the law. There are times when breaking the rule is important. And so you need, again, to think about this more. The other way to be wrong is to depart from the truth. And I don't talk about lying. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But when we talk about departure from the truth, those are the things where we just kind of absolve ourselves. Well, I didn't lie. I didn't really answer the questions. Politicians are so good at this that we almost think it's the right way to talk. It's like, oh, look at me. Aren't I clever? I danced around that. But of course, a departure from the truth, which I'll define as accurate, complete, and relevant, is kind of not a great way to go. And we need to check ourselves on that. And I tell people, they say to me, I'm so lucky I've never had to face an ethical issue. Well, you're not paying attention then. Because while it's a little early here, I don't think, had an ethical issue yet this morning, but I probably will run into one today because sometimes they're itty bitty and not terribly consequential, so it doesn't matter, right? But if you're not thinking about them, you don't notice them. And as they creep up and get more important. In fact, I tell students, and they hate me for this, but I would tell students about departing from the truth. It really becomes a habit. It really, when you do it and you say, yeah, that was a good thing to do, as things get more important, you slide into it. Anyway, that was two. I better stay on track here. The third way to be wrong is I think, the most difficult one, because it's where we say, well, it's just wrong. I would never do that because it's wrong. And look at that. And we usually use it in judgment. Look at that person. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. But that one's a societal wrong, and it's really bound by our time and place. And when we're talking about multi-generational, multicultural workplaces, it doesn't hold up anymore. So you can't count, if you're a leader, on your employees and people within the workplace behaving right because they just know it's the right thing to do. They'll look at you and go, no, that's right. That's the way to do it. I'm seeing it with Gen Z, by the way. They have a kind of a different take on the world, and they're really challenging us in the workplace as leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the whole quiet quitting phenomenon, to me, that feels like a prime example of that, doesn't it? Because there's loads of sort of the earlier generations, let's call them, I'll be kind, who would look at that and say, well, no, that's not good enough. That's wrong. You're doing the wrong thing there. You're not working, above and beyond, and that's bad. Whereas the newer generations, in my opinion, quite rightly, are saying, well, no, I'm working what I'm paid to work. I'm meeting the requirements of my contract. If you want me to do more, then incentivize me to do more. And I think that's fair enough.
I absolutely agree. And when I say to people, when they talk to me about this and I explain it just like you do, they go, yeah, I've never really liked the fact that my boss is putting pressure on me. And, it didn't lead to the C-suite. I'm just working really, really hard. And so, yeah, the other one that they are accused of quite often is being disrespectful. And it's because Gen Z say, well, let's cut through this. Why am I, having to say it this way or that way? They're just going to speak plainly. Now, they're young and maybe we could take some of the revenges off. But if you just stop and don't hear the disrespect, sometimes you hear the truth. And that's not a bad thing. No,
definitely. It's interesting. So I'm an old millennial, I think.
Yes.
Well, I'm right at the far back. But
I'm sorry,
so I kind of
you were old.
No. Yeah, I got what you mean. You agree with me, yeah. So what I find quite interesting is kind of sitting between those two generations that quite often are at loggerheads in these kinds of issues. And so the quiet quitting one, I think the same with the respect example as well that you've just talked about. I can see it from both sides because I entered the workplace when those ways of looking at it were the norm. But then I've also been in the workplace and been young enough at the time to see, actually, that doesn't quite work, does it? That's not the way I want to do it. That's not the way most of my generation think either. And something's got to change. And then having been in the workplace as that change has happened, I feel like it's quite an interesting perspective on it. And the respect one, yeah. I don't know. I think sometimes that can be quite a toxic concept, can't it? Because leaders get kind of caught up in this idea of, well, I'm in charge. I demand respect. I deserve respect. And I think we forget it's like trust. Like it's not automatic. It's earned. And if you want it, you've got to give it as well.
My generation was taught something about respecting the position. So if you were the CEO, regardless of whether you were really kind of a jerk or not, I still had to treat you with respect. And we accepted that. You've earned it by rank. And that's really starting to go out the window. And I can think of times when a really nice boss that I had, but he used a lot of jargon when he talked to me. And one of the things he would say is, we work hard and we play hard. And I think, well, really what you're saying to me is that you want me to work hard. Because I'm not seeing a whole lot of playing in the workplace. And, but if I had said that to him, no matter how nicely I said it, he would have found that disrespectful. And because of our generation, because of the way we were taught. But again, when you start to think about it, I'm really hopeful. I think that we're on the cusp of potentially a real revolution in the workplace. And I think leaders need to be really considering these things. And yes, from an ethics perspective and the generational perspective, I think we can make some real good changes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's none of these changes, I think, are for the worse. I think they're only going to be for the better. And I think, just one more thought on that kind of the respect, the trust, the loyalty aspect of it. And for me, it may be shifting in terms of the perspectives that employees have, but the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that it's never actually been about that. If you're worthy of it, if you deserve it, if you earn it, it doesn't really matter whether you think you're entitled to it or not, kind of thing. It's not. And if you have to fall back on that kind of the rank situation, the automatic respect because of your position, then you probably don't deserve it, frankly.
That's right. That's absolutely true. And I think that we're seeing it. And I don't think it's just the young generation, I think we're all feeling it, is that the world is in a rather strange place right now. And there's a lot of things that are making us feel unhappy, distrustful. We don't know. And I'm not blaming the media, but I'm pointing out that the media highlights these things. And so we see more of this bad behavior. And it scares us. It's like, who do we trust anymore? I can't trust anyone. I can't trust my doctor. I can't trust my politicians. I can't trust the lawyers. I can't trust the accountants. Who can I trust? And so until we start to resolve this in our own mind about how we look at these things and how do we think critically, how do we listen critically as we refine these skills, it should improve things, I hope.
Yes, I know what you mean with the media of it. I think that's kind of the downside of the internet, isn't it? I mean, the upside is there's so much information at your fingertips any time, but the downside is there's so much information at your fingertips at any time.
And that, again, going back to Gen Z, is one of their problems because they live on the internet. And of course, a lot of them were forced into it during COVID, where that was their only social contact. And so while they are absolutely very passionate about civil justice and that type of thing, which I really applaud, I think it's great, I'm afraid there's a danger that they'll listen to the loudest voice, as opposed to thinking critically about it and applying, again, an ethics filter and really looking at it and putting that energy where it can be used very effectively. And it's a shame, because right now there's a lot of energy. I think it's going to get dampened. I think it's going to be quelled, and we, again, miss an opportunity for some positive changes.
Yes, I mean, it's something I find a bit concerning as well. It's this. I mean, people talk about it as an echo chamber, don't they? But I think, that's maybe a bit reductive, but I can see where they're coming from, because the negative stories, the kind of the gossip, the toxic sounding stuff, that gets more clicks, doesn't it? Because people are like, oh, that sounds juicy, I'm going to read that. Whereas if you start talking about, look at this amazing thing, isn't this an optimistic way of looking at the world? People are just like, boring, I don't want to read that.
How naive, right? People say that they sense this idea of we can make a change. They say, no, we've been there. And certainly anyone in my generation I see a lot of similarities. In my generation, we were protesting, we were dropping out, we were, hated the establishment, weren't going to trust anyone over 40. That was our mantra. And somehow or other, we mostly joined the corporate world and got in lockstep and moved forward. Didn't make as much change as we could have, and yet we did make changes. And certainly, in the United States, I think the protests against the war in Vietnam were very effective, but that was different. There's people protesting around the world to end wars that it's more complicated, shall I say, that our own country may not have as much effect as they think, and that just calling for us to stop supporting one side or the other. I don't want to get into the politics, but one side or the other misses the conversation around what are the problems and how do you fix them. They just say, well, stop the war. Well, that's fine if one side stops and the other side continues. That's not going to work very well, is it?
Yeah, again, without going into the politics, it is quite difficult to do that when there's one party that's very much the aggressor. Not quite the same as the Vietnam situation, I suspect.
Yeah, I think there was, because it was more localized. As big as the United States is, it was something they could do. They were the aggressor and they could pull back. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said the aggressor. But, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, but I think the way it happened as well, like it wasn't like overnight suddenly there was a big war, was it? It was kind of a drip feed over several years of escalations. Anyway, I mean, there's probably more. Yeah.
I just to get onto safer ground, we're out of the politics. When you talk about these things in the workplace, though, and one of my favorite topics when I talk about this is around when you have to, as a leader, deal with an employee who stepped out of line, and so we all have biases. That's just built in, and we can try and damp them, but we will have them. And there's good reasons for that. It allows us to make decisions more quickly. We won't go into the whole thing on that, but we have to then consider the fact that if the employee is one you really like, and they've been a really good employee, and they've now done something that requires in your policies to write them up, formal note to file, right? but you do know that they've applied for a promotion or a job change or whatever that requires that they have a clean record. And that if you put that note in the file, it's going to really hurt their chances of getting ahead. That's a huge ethical issue that has, I'd say, daily ramifications. People have to deal with this kind of thing. So if you rely on the rule, you'll say, well, I have to write you up, David. I can't help it. It's beyond my control. I will write you up. And that's fine because that's justice, which calls for you did something wrong. We're going to have consequences versus a mercy concept, which you know what, you're a great worker and I like you and I don't want to see you have harm. It's also got long and short-term consequences because if you do it for the one employee, how do you justify or think about that? I don't like the word justify, but how do you think about it going forward? Do you always do one thing or the other? So those long and short term, or someone hears about it. So there's some consequences there. If people start to say, well, you know, they wrote me up, but they didn't write David up. So obviously there's favoritism there and now they lose trust. That's not a good thing. It's also a, truth versus loyalty. You know, really the truth is this person did do this. And now you're feeling very loyal to them because you like them. So those are just 3 of the 4 perspectives we can look at ethical issues from, and we encounter them daily as parents, but as leaders, certainly.
Yeah, and it touches on the concept of fairness as well, doesn't it? And,
yes.
And even that, I feel like the context can have an impact.
Of course it can.
Because, I mean, it's very easy, isn't it? It's just look at a situation like that and say, well, you know, in the interest of fairness, everyone is treated exactly the same, regardless of anything else. Everyone gets the same treatment. But that may not actually be that fair because there might be one person in that situation that's, I don't know, for whatever reason, they've got some other circumstance going on. Maybe it's outside of their professional work, or maybe there's something else working against them that nobody else knows. And so you do give them a break because it's warranted. But to everyone else, that looks like you're being unfair. But are you? Are you actually being quite fair? It's another challenging one, isn't it?
And this is why these things are difficult. And without a framework, without a way, and one of the things I really would love to be able to do is to help people develop a language around it so that they can have the conversation more contained. Otherwise, it gets really squishy around the edges and you get into gray concepts and it gets just very emotional, I find. So if you can contain it a little bit more, especially for professionals, because we do like kind of containers and rules and language, I think it helps us then to have broader conversations. I was talking at a conference for critical thinking, and we were talking about ethics, of course. And one of these very, very good thinkers, very smart person, said, well, you're talking about situational ethics, and that's just wrong. Oh, that was interesting. So I'm thinking, well, you're very rule-bound. We didn't get into a big discussion about this, but that person's approach was, well, it's either right or it's wrong, and it's black and white. And why are we having this conversation? They were quite dismissive, and I was very surprised. So I think that's not unusual, right? Every time I'm surprised, I go, you know what? That wasn't a one-off. I have to listen and understand that that's how some people see this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like morality, isn't it? Are there any absolutes? I don't know. I mean, some of the things that we would think of as absolutes now, you go back a few hundred years in history and it's the opposite, isn't it? So if it wasn't like that hundreds of years ago, then is it really an absolute? Or is it just society has changed? And
I tell people in the workplace, they'll say, but it's against policy. And I say, maybe your policy's wrong. Go look at it. How long has it been in existence? How is it worded? What does it actually say? Because no matter how hard we try to write good policies, we cannot nail every single instance. And we try to, deal with that in the procedures side of it. But still in all, policies and procedures are primarily like the law. They set a boundary, right? So that if you're in clear transgression of this, we now know what the remedy is. We now know we're going to fire you or put you in jail or whatever the remedy is. So they're more punitive as opposed to any kind of a guidance system. You need to have that yourself. You need to start with, how do I think about this? And then you can check. One of the things I encounter all the time is someone will tell me, we can't do that. It's against the law. They'll say, we can't fire an employee. It's illegal. No, we cannot. It's against the law. No, you can fire an employee. Of course you can. Will there be consequences? Yeah. Are you willing to accept the consequences? Yeah. but you can. And so as soon as we get into that, you can't, the rules say we cannot, I think you're making a mistake.
Yeah. Again, I can see both sides of this because in past lives, I've been the person who said, no, you can't do that because,
Me too.
but at the same time, and this applies, it applies to policies and procedures, definitely. It probably applies even more to laws, but they're only as good as the people who wrote them. They're only as effective, and they can only cover as many circumstances or situations as those people who wrote them could think of at the time. You know, and as you said earlier, we're all fallible. We're all got biases. You know, so just trusting the policy isn't always going to be the right answer.
And when you think about policies and procedures and the processes of composing them, and I've certainly gone through that with different boards that I've sat on. I mean, it's a long process and it's a difficult process. And so now they're written. And yet things are changing very rapidly and people are changing very rapidly. And so I get it again. I'm not saying you should throw them out, but you can start to see the built-in difficulties around it, and all the more reason for leaders to help everyone understand how to think about this and have the conversations, and also be open to the fact that you're right. Different cultures, different generations will look at it differently, and have a conversation around it, which is not the same as always saying, oh, Gen Z are this way, so we have to do it their way. Or, you know, this culture thinks like this, so we have to accommodate that. There's a difference between a tolerance and an understanding, and just immediately changing everything, you know, because that's not right either.
No, you just spend your whole career writing and rewriting, wouldn't you? I mean, there's a balance to be had, definitely, because I think once it becomes obvious that the policy isn't fit for purpose, you've got to change it. Like, you can't just. And it's interesting, like, how many times have you heard the phrase when writing one of these policies, like, you know, we're not going to be able to get it perfect first time. We're not going to be able to write it to cover everything. Let's just do the best we can for now and worry about it later. And then, in my experience anyway, the people who say that when it's being written are then the same people later who say, no, the policy says this, so we have to do that.
That's the truth. Especially if you're the person writing it, you really start to fall in love with it. And then when you said it's not perfect, it was because other people were telling you it wasn't perfect. And so, no, this is a really good policy, and we're going to live with it. That's a very good point. Yeah.
You just say whatever you have to say to get them to sign off on it, and then once it's set in stone, you've won. Then,
yeah. That's something I've seen, again, not just with policies, but in business. Let's do this, and then we'll find out where the pain is, and then we'll fix it. Well, that's not so bad if the pain is just some people complaining a bit and you can quickly fix it. It's bad if the result of it is people get hurt or injured or, you know, really have consequences from your kind of let's see what happens approach to things. And risk management, we won't even talk about risk management. Again, if you're not factoring ethics into your risk management policies, and I don't mean tick a box, you know, I sound so critical sometimes, but I see it in playing out that when there's something bad happens, we rewrite the policies, we rewrite the procedures, and then we create checklists. And on those checklists, we have to, through compliance, make sure we tick the boxes. And we tick the boxes to say, did you consider ethical issues? Tick. Did you? No, but now at least when you send that off to the government as a compliance document, you're covered. At least later when something bad happens, you go, well, we did think about it, but, you know, we can't cover everything. And that's true. But how about we give it a little bit of thought, just a little bit of conversation around it. Now, again, I'm sounding very critical because I know a lot of people do a lot of good work in this area as well, David. I'm very aware that people are trying all the time.
100%. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, though. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like anything where it's just a checkbox, you might as well not bother doing it because no one's ever going to untick the tick box, are they? No one's going to admit they haven't done it.
Well, you know, David, that's a really great example. And you started with the conversation around ethics. And when I started ethics, you started accounting, talking about accounting back in the connection between the two. Yeah. And when I started in accounting, it was all paper based in those days because, you know, I'm old. But anyway, and we had these checklists. I'm sure they still have them. They're just all computerized now. And you tick off all these little boxes. It was 3 pages long for a simple file. And so, you know, basically you tick, tick, tick. I was, you know, hadn't been there that long. So I was reading these questions a little more carefully. And I got to one and I went, well, that doesn't apply. And the answers are yes or no. Yes or no. Yes or no. Which will I choose? Well, I chose no. because it didn't apply. It absolutely, I did not do that. Why? Because it didn't apply. I took it to my boss, they're reviewing the file, they come back and say, no, you have to tick yes. I said, why do I have to tick yes? And I explained it. Well, because when someone comes in to review the practice, they look at these checklists and they go, oh, there was no spot to say, this is why I didn't do it. So that was, I think, my first, wait a minute, there's a flaw in this system here moment where I thought, no, there's something wrong. They're making me lie.
I think some things are designed or are well suited to be systemized like that, and some things are not. I think if it's a complex question, it's not going to be a yes or no answer, is it? You need to give a little text box so you can give a rationale for your answer.
No, explain. If yes, that's fine. But if, assuming yes was the right answer for everything, if it's no, then just explain. And then somebody goes, oh, of course, that makes sense. And you carry on. Yeah.
Which ties it back to what you were saying earlier about lying and not wanting to talk about that. But I mean, lies of omission, that's what we're talking about ultimately, isn't it? And that's the political leaning as well these days, I think.
Yes, exactly. They depart from the truth by not being complete, or they say something that's true, absolutely true, completely irrelevant to the question that was asked. But people will sometimes just hear the truth and go, yeah, that's true. And they won't stop to think about, but it didn't have anything to do with that. I remember one place I was working, and we won't, name names or anything, but where we had a very nice, generous sick day policy. And I went to my boss and I said, I won't be here on Friday. And these are the accommodations I've made because I was teaching. Okay. So for the students, and I've done this and I've done that. And I'm just letting you know, I won't be here on Friday. Covered her ears and said, don't tell me that. Phone in sick on Friday morning. I even said to her, I says, I don't care if you pay me or not. I'm telling you, I won't be here on Friday. I cannot be here on Friday. How you deal with that on your end, paying me, not paying me, is entirely up to you. But don't make me lie. Yeah. And the students would have been disenfranchised if I phoned up on Friday morning and canceled the class after they'd come in, right? That would have been very, in the grand scheme of things, unfair. So I think that we've all experienced moments in our workplace when we look back and we may have been bothered by them a little bit or a lot, but we've all experienced those moments where this isn't quite fitting. But we justify our behavior because this is the way it is. This is what everyone else is doing. No harm, no foul. There's lots of language about how we justify things. And as soon as you start to justify things, a moment of self-reflection of, why do I feel the need to justify this?
I think that's a really interesting example as well, though, because in the context of lying and ethics, sometimes people feel like the lie is for the greater good, or it's for the good of an individual. And that's a great example of that, I think. Like, that person probably thought, well, I'm doing Michelle a favour here. But obviously that didn't sit right with your ethics, nor should it have. Yeah. And I've been on the receiving end of similar conversations, and I can immediately picture the frustration when you said, well, don't make me lie. Because I'm like, oh, come on, I'm just trying to help. It's like, but
please don't do that. Yeah. And those little white lies, which, are the grease that makes society work well. I'm not suggesting that we should suddenly become brutally honest, but there's a time and place, even our personal relationships, to consider whether, if a friend asks us something, are we telling them, departing from the truth or telling a lie out of kindness to them, or is it because it's easier for us? And so, if a friend says, come to this whatever with me, and you really like your friend and you really hate that thing they want to do, and so you make up some excuse because you don't want to lose the friendship. But I think most times, if you just thought about it and said, you know what, I really like you, I really hate craft shows or whatever it is that you're thinking about that you don't want to go to, it should help the relationship. But it's certainly easier to lie. One of my favorite things to tell young people is just say no. Don't make an excuse. Like if someone says, do you want to come to the party? Say no. Why? Just no. Now you've removed yourself from the need to lie or to be too honest and hurt their feelings. Just say no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
easier said than done, David.
Yeah, I mean, I've done both, and I don't know. I think there's a question of where you draw the line, isn't it? And I think everyone has to make their own decision on that. And I mean, in the workplace setting and from a leadership perspective, it's about priorities as well. You know, what's most important to the situation or to your leadership or to your team or the individuals within it. And yeah, I mean, it's a constantly moving picture, isn't it? You've just got to I think this is why it's so exhausting and why so many people don't want to think about it.
You know, when you bring it back to leadership, when you're doing a performance evaluation, right? And you need to deliver some helpful, useful information. And it's going to be helpful in one of two ways. It's going to start signaling to the person, you know what, you are going to not be here very long because this isn't working out. Or they can fix it. There's really things that if they choose to do, they can improve their performance. And so I hate this sandwich. I don't know. You familiar with the sandwich concept of, where you say, you know, we really, really, really like you. You're really screwing up in this area and you're really doing a horrible job. And the person starts to look like they're going to cry. And then you say, but you're a fine human being. Go out into the world. We love you. And the person hears the beginning and the end and that little confusing piece in the middle. I've even heard people come out of performance reviews and say, you know, I guess there's a few things I can fix, but the good news is they really like me. And I knew that like isn't the issue. The part is that they're really concerned that you're not going to last. You're not going to fit in. You're not getting where you need to be. So we do people, I think, a disservice when we don't, again, find a way to be truthful. And that's not brutal, I guess maybe occasionally brutal is important too, but generally speaking, just find a place where you can deliver it as simply as possible. And we also make a mistake when we over-explain it because now the person's going, I get it. You want me to take a course on this. And now you've gone on and on. Like, stop, please. You're just making this work.
Yeah, or they've just completely forgotten the point you started with and they're just struggling to comprehend everything else you throw at them. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the sandwich either. But I mean, it is a tricky thing to do, definitely.
I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate having to tell people bad news.
I think if you put in the time and you've invested in the relationship, and this isn't like the first time you're having to raise it, or it's not like the first sort of conversation you've got to have, it can be quite, I won't say painless. It can go relatively smoothly, let's say. But yeah, I mean, I've gone back and forth on the methods of that as well. Like I used to we'd start with the bad, whatever that was. The bad news, we'll do that first. We'll talk about it constructively. We'll go through the honesty piece. Doesn't have to be brutal. It should be kind, whatever way you do it. And I think constructive is the key word there, isn't it? This is what's not working. This is why it's not working. This is the impact it's having. Let's talk about what we can do about it. That kind of approach.
You're coming to my other favorite topic, which is communication. And a lot of people that find themselves in leadership positions, some of them are excellent communicators, and some of them, again, have risen up through an organization, and they have tremendous skills, but communication might not be their strong suit, especially this type of communication, right, where you're one-on-one. Yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and it's the kind of communication that most people try to avoid as well, so they won't be very well practiced in it.
That's right. I like that. Not practiced in it. Maybe we should have little workshops where people tell each other horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, some sort of training maybe, or role playing. I think there's definitely a role for that, isn't there?
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's just like leadership development. Like, how many people in the world, probably the majority, who get promoted and are never taught how to do the next job? I mean, I'm always complaining about that. It's one of my big sort of probably top 2 or 3 of leadership hates.
I agree. And managers in particular, and the word manager is very often, they rise up through the ranks and they really know their job. But now that, the Peter principle, they are now in a management position and they've not been trained. And somebody will send them on a management training course for a week or a month. Well, it's insufficient. It's a skill, a talent. And there's people, as we all know, that are leaders and really good at these things that never rise up into positions of authority and just simply are the person that can influence other people, help other people move forward. And that's, of course, what a true leader should be doing is moving things forward, not necessarily running to the front and saying, follow me, but simply, this is where we're all going. And one of my favorite definitions of leadership was find out where everyone else is going and get in front. We like that. It's like, this is where they're all heading. I know how to get there. Let me get to the front.
Yeah, I mean, to paraphrase that great cliche, like the best time to start learning leadership is now, isn't it? Well, or yesterday, but next best time is now.
Yeah.
But I think actually the best time to start developing people and offering them those leadership development opportunities is the day they join your organization. Don't wait until you've promoted them. It's too late by then. Now they're already behind the curve then.
Excellent point. And of course, again, one of the systemic problems in organizations is very often these things are, I'll say, tenure based, or, the union says this is how you progress through. And the next thing you know, you're confronted with it. Some unions, I don't know how universal this is, but you get to a point where if you don't want that next one, you have to tell them. And then I think it's called red circling, where they then hold you at that. And there's all sorts of strange things there. And I know lots of people that said, I didn't want to be a manager. I never wanted to move to that. And yet they showed great leadership concepts and potentials and everything else, but they didn't want to get into other aspects of that position. They didn't see that as the place where they could best exercise their skills. And they often then really shone outside of their organization. They did volunteer work and other things where their leadership qualities could really be utilized effectively.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole thing, isn't there, around job design as well with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it fairly often on the podcast, actually, but from the other perspective about, so many people get to that point in their career and they don't really want to take a management role. They're not really interested in leadership, but they take the job anyway when it's offered. Why? Because they want the pay rise. And that's the only way to get it. So I think there's two sides to that job design problem. There's one is, what's the route to progression, to pay rise, to, ever greater growth and future if you're not interested in leadership? Is there some sort of specialism track like a lot of militaries do, for example? And then the other side of it is, well, what about the people who are really good at that leadership thing, but they don't want to do the administrative aspects of management, or they don't want to take the responsibility, or, and so on and so on. What can we do with those people to still get the benefit of their leadership skills and their potential for the organization?
What a great conversation right there, right? What can we do to get the best from this person to the benefit of our organization? What a great way of thinking about things. And I have heard some of your podcasts where you were talking about exactly that type of thing and job design. Yeah. The sad part is everything's complicated. Mm-hmm. So, you have to always be attempting to bring things back, in my mind, to the simplest way that you can talk about it. You can always make things more complicated, but if you start with the morass, then you never can solve it. You just get overwhelmed, right? So again, I sort of focus as you do on certain aspects of it to try and make improvements in certain areas.
Yeah, but I think wanting to simplify the big complex issue, I think that's where a lot of people are going wrong as well, because it's the method they choose to simplify it, which is, we'll just have a carbon copy of the job description for every manager, and that's what it is. If you want the promotion, that's what it is. What I'd like to see is a different route to simplify it, so where it's more individual based. So yes. What would work for you? What do you want? What's your development potential? Where do you want to go with your career? But I get why a lot of managers and senior leaders don't want to have that conversation either, though.
It's a really good. I just, you really just kind of blew my mind there, because I focus on the simplification, but you gave me a perfect example of businesses really do try and simplify all of their processes, but they do it at a great expense to other things. So I think I'm talking about simplifying the thought process, not about the process itself, if that makes any sense to you. And I think we're in agreement on that. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've covered loads of questions without me having to ask them, which is always nice.
Sorry.
It's good. It means the conversation has just naturally gone in the right direction, which is excellent. Yeah. So I want to ask you more about ethics, because I do find it really interesting. So, I mean, I think we've covered about sort of the whys and the what of the problem. What are maybe a few more examples, perhaps, of how leaders can actually address this problem. Like, what can we do to make sure that we're factoring ethics in a practical but real way? So it's not like the box ticking, but it's also not just turning it into an endless sort of pulling your hair out thought exercise.
Yeah, when again, that if it's too big, we're not going to solve it kind of thing.
Exactly.
And again, is this the absolute right answer? I don't know. But what I would love to see is the integration of a way of looking at it. And I said about, we can talk about something being wrong 3 ways. And as soon as you start looking at things that way, it helps to understand why I'm saying something's wrong and to question whether it truly is wrong, or is there a competing thing that is so strong it overrides that wrong. So in other words, what I'll say then is it's right to follow the rules. Absolutely. But it's also right to do this. And when we find that competing right and that conflict and recognize that ethical issue. And so even just talking about something like that, and again, I kind of simplify things, right? But let's bring it down to, can we make a sentence here that says, where is the conflict? Why is this an ethical issue? And so looking for the wrong things. And if it's clear, it's absolutely clear, it would be wrong to do that, then don't do it. I agree that sometimes is the simple answer. It's often not, though. It has nuances and other factors, and giving people a language, a way of talking about it, looking at what's wrong, looking at there's only, again, 4 ethical perspectives, and we're all familiar with them. We don't necessarily use the language around them. And one of the reasons I think this is so important is if leaders were to integrate that for themselves, they can share that in every conversation they have with an employee. They can be guiding the conversation, helping people see why. Why is this important? So instead of just telling people, don't do that, we can say, why is this important? How does it benefit? And like all ethical issues, you've got to be careful that you're not judgmental. When you say, well, you can't do that because it's wrong, you've shamed someone because they now are being told they did something they shouldn't have done. Can you find another way of having that conversation? Again, I have, some really tangible things that you can do. But the other aspect is, how do we resolve these things then? When we have now framed it, if I can just digress for a second, the most difficult thing to do in a problem-solving process is to identify the problem clearly. And that's true in ethics. So if you can't get that clear, everything else kind of like gets squishy. But once you do that, you get down to resolving it. You look at it, and what I like to talk about is 3 ways of resolving any ethical issue. And they're distilled from centuries of philosophical discussions. And I mean, if for anyone that's interested, I can line it up with who said it and when they said it. That's not interesting to me. I read about it, but it's not interesting to the conversation. So you use a care-based. This is for some people the default position, right? They just are very compassionate. If you're in a meeting with them, they're always, oh no, that would be so wrong. We can't do that. And, so they're not necessarily using a right approach, but I get it. And it's a great way of doing things, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Every major religion. Anyway, and then there's the rules-based approach, which is the book says. The book says. And it really, from a philosophical point of view, what you're saying is there should be a rule. Everybody in the world should be doing exactly this in this situation, even if the rule doesn't exist. It can be too rigid. It's what's used by the military. It's necessary in the military because people have to react very quickly. So the rules-based approach is very quick, very efficient, and because it's consistent, it does feel fair, but it doesn't allow for critical thought. It's like, nope, book says that, we're not doing it, or we are doing it, whichever way. And the final one is to look at things from an end space. And that's difficult because we're now looking at a situation that exists right this second and trying to think about what the consequences might be of that. And whenever you're future gazing, that's difficult. Accountants get called in these situations. People didn't recognize that's what they were doing, but they're saying, okay, we've done a risk analysis. Do some quantitative analysis for us so that we can measure this. Oh, we're obsessed with measuring things. People love numbers. They seem so precise. So we come back and we say, well, if you make that we see a design flaw in your product, and right now the way it is that, it might blow up and burn people. That's not a good thing. What are we going to do about it? Well, we could fix it, and that's going to cost you $14 million. That doesn't sound good. How many people are going to get injured? Oh, maybe 3. You notice the maybe? I mean, we would say, as accountants, we would say that very precisely. We would have some real good analysis behind how many people are going to get it. And it is good analysis. It's still just that, right? It's predicting a possibility. So we say, well, the possibility is 3%. And if it happens, the cost will be this, 14 million. Well, if you take 3% of 14 million, it's less than 14 million. Which are you going to do? You're going to take the risk. You've now done everything that risk analysis tells you to do. AI is going to make us crunch those numbers even better. We're still trying to predict the unpredictable. And if you're not sitting down and saying, yeah, but if one of these things explodes at any time in the future, how do we feel about that? Not just the consequences to your reputation, which is important. How are you as a decision maker going to feel? And you need to talk about that. And at some point, sometimes we still have to make those hard decisions. And so I always say at the end of it, whatever you decide might have good consequences or might be terrible. You have to be able to live with that. So that's why we should individually have a good thought process on ethics. So we can go and say, I did the best I could and mean it.
It's a really good analysis, and it's very interesting, especially the last one. I mean, as you were talking, there's a couple of high-profile incidents of big businesses in the last few years that sprung to mind, and governments as well. Let's be honest.
Oh, there's tons of them. There's tons of them.
Yeah, and I guess it's back to risk, isn't it? And what your appetite for that is. And I don't know actually that. I understand why businesses do it, and they bring it back to the numbers, but I don't know if that's the right answer. I almost think you're better coming at it from the ethics and the moral side and not thinking about the financial implications necessarily until you've got to a point where you know what the right thing is or the right decision is. And then, okay, what's it going to cost?
I think that's really perfect, David. I think, yes, if you consider it from a human being, because there's not just one person making these decisions. There's a team of people making the decision. There's a board of directors, whatever it is. And you have a conversation and have reached something that you're satisfied with. Okay, now throw the numbers into this mix, because maybe you're saying we're so, the thought that might happen I'm terrified. We can't let that happen. Now we can do some analysis. And if it's really quite a small risk, never mind the cost of it, but it's really like, yeah, but it's only a 0.0003 chance based on statistical analysis, and nothing has changed in the world. You have to always factor that in because your analysis is always historic, right? But I don't see anything that has changed so significantly as to change the validity of this number. Okay, because we would never leave home if we were so risk averse, right?
That is true, yeah. But I think, especially when it comes to things like the safety side of it. So, from my background in the aerospace industry, for example, safety is a big thing. Rightly so. And sometimes there are issues where if it happens once, that's one too many. Again, yeah, maybe you can guess what examples I might have been thinking of just now. And I do feel like, and maybe this is my bias talking, but the second you start thinking about that in terms of dollar signs, you're removing the vital human component from that decision. And you're allowing people to look at it in terms of financial risk when it actually might be, say, the risk of life loss.
And you nailed that precisely. And obviously, if I can be, really, I don't know what the right word is for that, but, we'll diminish your whole conversation by saying, well, then we should just take all the planes out of the air, because there's always a possibility of something bad happening. Of course there is. So you're still going to consider, and I love the way you were sort of suggesting what you're working towards is towards the impossible of there never being a bad outcome of anything we do. That's what we're all working towards. Recognizing that the world is complicated, unexpected things happen, and we cannot possibly plan for all of that, but let's consider how possible it is, how likely it is. So I like the idea of let's look at the possibility number, but let's not marry it too closely to dollars because it can be confusing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're right, of course. Although I would say statistically, as Superman always said, it is the safest way to travel.
It is. I do it all the time, right? So no, I
Yeah.
agree. But that's
Yeah.
what I say about how the economic conditions, I think, is a great example of it, because we use economic models to predict, what's going to happen. It influences share prices. It influences how business operate. There's all sorts of impacts that come out of what our governments do when they're talking about financial analysis from that high level perspective. And then when there's an economic crisis like there was in the 80s, they go, there's a flaw here. Something's not quite right. And I think at that point, they must have collectively said to themselves, yeah, but that was a one-off, because we didn't really change much until 10 years later when we had another economic crisis. And then we went, so they did make a lot of changes. Again, I can be critical of these things because I think that's my role sometimes, is to just look at these things contrary. But they really were looking at it to protect the banks, which is good. We do want to protect the banks. There's stability in that. But some of the things that they brought in then weren't necessarily ethical. Like, it's harder and harder for people to buy houses, and harder for people to borrow money when they need to borrow money. And as somebody, comedians will tell you all the time, is like, they say, oh, you can't borrow any money because you don't have enough money in your bank account. They go, well, if I had the money in my bank account, I wouldn't be asking to borrow it. People that say, I'm paying $4,000 a month in rent, but I don't qualify for a mortgage, where the mortgage payment would be $3,800 a month, because the bank's algorithms say no. And that's to protect the banks because they've made some bad mistakes and there's been crises.
The cynic in me thinks that maybe they're the ones who made the mistake. They should be the ones facing the consequence, and not still getting like the golden parachutes and the six-figure salaries and so on.
David, I can see we could talk for hours. Yeah,
I mean, we're getting into politics there, aren't we? Again, but
you cannot talk ethics without getting into politics.
No, it's true. I mean, in the UK, we had one after like the credit crunch in 2008. There was one particularly high-profile bank that I think they had knowingly done wrong. They were bailed out by the taxpayer. The taxpayer ended up owning a percentage of the bank, and the CEO stayed in place, was still getting his annual bonus in the millions. And I mean, that to me, there's an ethical thing there, isn't there? I mean, that's something where you look at that and go, well, no, that's just wrong. But is it in the context? I don't know. Who can say?
It depends on how you look at it, because the policy says that if we fire this person, we have to give them $1 million, so is it wrong from that perspective? But that's that sense, right? That's that moral sense, that social, societal wrong that I think most of us do feel. And yet I like to point out to people, well, you're outraged about that, but this is how it's built into the system. You have to change the system. And you have to think about, why was that policy written? Boeing in the United States is having terrible trouble. And the first time they had terrible problems is they fired the CEO. And people go, yay. But like you said, he was fired with a very generous severance package. You and I would like, just to have that. Thank you very much. So not sure that was this wonderful solution. And then they took the chairman of the board, who is ultimately responsible for the CEO, and put that person into the CEO's position. And in fact, had to change their policy on how old you could be working in the industry because he was too old. Thinking, well, what's wrong with this picture? And these are smart people, and they're good people. Nobody wants to do something horrendous. You're not sitting around the boardroom table saying, what can we do? Little create a crisis. They're not.
I don't know. I mean, a small percentage of bad actors probably are, but yes, on the whole, I agree.
Yes, we can't dismiss the fact that there are, that some of, now this is interesting to me, because some bad actors think they're good. And I mean, truly do, in their hearts, think they're good. They say, I'm doing this for the good of the company.
Oh, I think all of them do. Yeah. I don't think they'd be able to do it if they didn't think they were good and they were doing the right thing. It's just, I think their perception of it is skewed for whatever reason.
That's right. And so again, if you can have a conversation around this, I actually saw this with a CEO. It was the CEO of the organization, and he was doing things that most people around felt was not the direction we wanted to take this organization. And as a board member, and again, you have to sometimes remind yourself you're ultimately responsible for that person. This is the only connection you have directly to the organization that you're legally and morally responsible for. You better be thinking about this a little harder. But he was well liked as a human being, right? So, and isn't that often true? People can be very likable, very nice, give their relatives money, all sorts of nice things about them, but that doesn't mean that they're behaving in a way that collectively you see. So taking and having to remind each individual director on a board that they personally have a moral and legal responsibility. You can't do the collective. Oh, well, kind of thing. Everybody else decided it. You have to do it individually. And we ultimately did. And I think it was the right thing. And I had the great pleasure of having to be one of the people that explained to him why, and having to say, you know what, if it was a likability contest, you'd win, but you're not doing what we are saying this organization should be doing, and it's not working. And I think he appreciated that. I hope that, or he was a good actor, because he seemed to take it quite well. But he was mad. I don't blame him. But there's a difference, right, between being very nice. As somebody said, and I love this quote, they said, we have to stop being nice and start being kind. And I thought, oh, there's a distinction there, and I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, a variation on a theme, like at some point, you've got to, I don't know. I mean, a lot of CEOs in particular in small startups, I think, suffer with this, but maybe you've seen it more widely than I have. If everyone else, literally everyone else in the room, is saying the opposite of you, at what point does the self-awareness kick in and go, oh, maybe I'm the wrong one here. Maybe I need to reassess my thinking. But yeah, how often does that happen? And how often is it just a case of, well, I'm the visionary, I know best. Everyone else just doesn't get it.
Oh, when you're talking about the visionary, when you're talking about the founder of this organization who takes it from zero to where you are today, it is very difficult for them to ever let go of that. It's also difficult for the people around to let them go, because they do see the vision. They do get that you got us here. And then, of course, sometimes in smaller organization where you've hired a CEO, so it's not the founder, but you've hired the CEO, they, with all kindness, may not be the most experienced in the realm of leading an organization because it's small. You're not paying them $1 million. And so they may mistake decisiveness for leadership. I made the same mistake myself, by the way. When I started out, I thought that being decisive was very, very important. It is, but not quite as important as I thought it was. And so you need to be decisive and flexible. And then you will suffer the consequence of occasionally people who want to bring you down saying you're indecisive as opposed to thoughtful. And so you have to be very careful how you word that. You can't just say, you're right, I changed my mind, because now you look indecisive, but to say, you're making very good points, and I'm really going to have to reconsider my position, and I think you've influenced my thinking, and let people know how hard this is to change your mind. It truly is. But some early in their leadership roles won't.
Yeah, I definitely did that as well. I mean, indecisive, I think, is an interesting one. I'm not sure the word means what it's most often used to mean either. I feel like a lot of the time that's thrown at leaders, it's because the person throwing it just disagrees with whatever the particular decision is at hand. But to me, like, being indecisive just means not making a decision. It doesn't mean changing your mind after you've made a decision, because that's fine. You might have learned something new. Something else might have changed. The decision doesn't stand anymore. So
that's a very good distinction. Yeah, indecisive. I like that. Just haven't really landed on a decision yet. I haven't made a decision. In politics, I'm really offended by this flip-flopping concept, and they toss this around all the time. Oh, they're a flip-flopper. Okay, that's a shoe. But anyway, we won't get into that. It's like, really, I respect a politician that will stand up and say on day one, this is what we're going to do, because they're often called upon to speak publicly in a very authoritative tone. And that's, again, their job, because they're trying to inspire confidence. And I get it. So some of them do it better than others, and some of them are a little awkward, but they say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why, and I support this. And then, 4 months later going, I really think we need to do this instead. Is that flip-flopping, or is that reasoned consideration after the fact with new information? I like to think it's the latter. Sometimes it's, though, blowing with the wind, depending on how people responded to what you announced. So.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the reason why the decision has changed, doesn't it? And perhaps as well, sometimes how frequently it happens. But yeah, sometimes I just wish a politician would stand up and give a speech and say, actually, I'm not sure.
Yes.
I don't know yet. I'm still assessing the option. I'm still thinking about this. These are the important factors we need to consider, but I haven't made a decision yet.
I agree.
I understand the pressure they're under from the press and elsewhere, no doubt, to just come out on a position, and that's the position. It will please these groups and you'll get more votes or whatever. But it feels dishonest, I think. That's the problem I have with it.
And when the world was simpler, and I mean, I'm not sure that it ever was, because I'm talking like 100 years ago, but when the world, in what we perceived to be a simpler place, where the politician was on the back of the train going across the country, doing true stump speeches to a small group of people without media attention, because there wasn't any, right? So they were talking to people. The politician was usually well-educated and certainly most likely wealthy person. They're talking in a different way. They're thinking about things differently. I'm not saying necessarily better, just saying than the person that's running the farms and the small businesses. And so they then needed to sound, I do have solutions for you. I am going to put a chicken in every pot. I am going to stop the war. Whatever it was. It's too complicated now. And I absolutely agree with you. I would really admire a politician who said that, who said, I'm not sure right now. Even if they had to act right now, even if they said we're acting on imperfect information, but there's a need to act immediately, this is the first steps. Be absolutely confident that we will adjust as new information comes in. Oh my gosh, I just wrote someone's speech for them. I think most people would respond to that.
And do you know what, though? I think 9 times out of 10, what you've just described, that is the actual situation. So why can't they just say that? Why do they still feel this need to present certainty? Anyway, I mean, as far as 100 years ago, further, not even that far back, but certainly historically, I think the other big distinction between then and now is the politician or the political leader or whoever, the prime minister, president, whatever. In that situation, they were better informed. They had greater access to information. Today, that's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily false either. I think a lot of the population have the illusion of information because of all the different and nasty parts of the internet and the media and fake news, etc., etc. Yeah. But I think that makes a difference, doesn't it, in the perception in both directions.
Absolutely brilliantly said, and I love that illusion of information. I'm going to try and remember that because that was a very nice phrase. You're absolutely right. It's the same reason, and I love the fact, and I talk about this and think about this all the time, is how what was true and how we built our countries and our societies isn't necessarily true anymore. And one of the examples is the myth that you needed a university degree to succeed in life. It is, as a former university teacher, I probably shouldn't say this, it's an absolute lie. Unless people put that barrier in place. And unfortunately, I know factory workers that are working with 2 degrees. Why? Whole other conversation for another day. But it's an absolute myth. The truth of that was, at one time, that did give you access to information that wasn't available to the common person. And so you could still be not a great leader. You could still be flawed, but you did have access to it. So there was truth. And now you're absolutely right. I know people that blow me away with how much they know about a topic they're interested in because they've gone on the internet and they've read the books and they've gone to the library, because none of that's difficult anymore for anyone.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you don't even have to go to the library, do you? You can just
go
on. Yeah.
It depends on what you're looking at, but the potential is there.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like I said much earlier in the episode, it's like the blessing and the curse, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan Arley, in his book Misbelief, talks about asking people, how do you know that? And he has this lovely little quiz that you take in the book, and he asks you on a scale of 1 to 10, which do you believe? Do you believe that this is true? And so you start marking these things, doing it as honestly as you can. The next page is, why do you believe that? And then you go, because my parents told me that. And you start realizing how often your
Yeah.
belief is informed by something someone else told you. And with all respect to my parents, they weren't always right. And certainly that person I heard on the internet doesn't have all the answers either. And some of them are just trying to sell stuff and make money.
And in this day and age as well, I'm not sure how many people be honest or self-reflective enough to answer that question this way, but sometimes I believe that because that's what I want to believe.
Oh, what a brilliant answer. Yes. I hope that's true is kind of what we're getting down to. That's okay. And that at least would be honest. And I did hear someone who was very religious that basically said that because that was what they needed. I hope that I'm right because it gives me confidence and makes me go through each day. And that's at least an honest answer, right?
Absolutely. And as you say, there's nothing wrong with it as long as you're aware that that's why.
Yeah, and you shouldn't be trying to convince everyone else. That's the other thing, right?
Yeah, indeed.
All these things, sometimes we've got off on sidetracks, but they're all about leadership qualities. They all are. They're about thinking about these things. Sorry, David, I cut you off.
That's okay. No, I think you're right. Definitely. I mean, they're all linked to leadership. Most of them linked to communication. There's definitely some ethical aspects to probably everything we've talked about as well. So a couple of more leadership focused questions then. What would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
Listen, that was a short answer, but really that sums it up. Everything we talked about, right? That if you're going to make thoughtful decisions, you need to listen to, in fact, probably most important, you listen to the critics. I tell people who've been criticized and they're upset with that sometimes, I say to them, really think about it. And if there's no truth in it, if the person is misinformed, misunderstood, that's not evil, they just misunderstood, then you can safely tuck that away and say, I'm not paying attention to that. But if there's any truth in it, think about it. What could you do? How could you fix it? How do you adjust it? Or how do you communicate that in a way that then helps everyone else? So yeah, listen, it's hard for a talker.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of leaders as well. And it's because of one of these big myths, isn't it, about leadership? And it's similar to the one about decisiveness, isn't it? Is we're expected to have the answer, to say the thing, to give the grand inspirational speech and all of that. And we have this idea in our head that means we don't listen, we talk. And it's actually completely the wrong way around.
It is.
I love the 2 ears, 1 mouth thing.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Like I said, it's still difficult for me. I've made my living talking. So, it's like, no, let me speak now. But no, I've certainly tried. And I know that when I listen to my students, even in the classroom, and what they were upset about and what they were complaining about. And sometimes I remind myself that they often didn't have the communication skills. And then I found that was true in the workplace as well. And I went to, into an organization and they were having trouble. And they said, well, one of the problems, the employees are all angry and they're yelling at their supervisors. You're listening to them. What's going wrong? Well, they need to learn to bring their problems to us in a more respectful manner. No, they're the employees. They may not have those skills. They may not have ever been trained in, and especially this was a factory. So in a factory, with all respect to factory workers everywhere, some people aren't good communicators. It's one of the reasons they aren't doing something else. They like this hands-on physical work and they don't want to talk about stuff. So when they're mad, they tend to say things like, I'm mad. You're a jerk. They may use language you don't like hearing. Doesn't mean they don't have a legitimate complaint. So you have to get past the noise. And it's the more you rise up in leadership positions, the more important it is to be able to filter the noise and hear what people are really trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm not to say that outward communication isn't important for leaders either, but you've got to listen first, because otherwise whatever you say, it's not going to be very relevant, is it, if you haven't listened to what the problem is. So
we all been in that position in our lives at some point where someone's telling you something, you say, but you're not listening to me. You don't understand. You're telling me this, but that's not even what I'm asking for or what I'm, expressing my concern around. And okay, that's true, but I need this. And there's nothing, the worst feeling in the world is to be misunderstood. And I think that's, unfortunately happens too often.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you get to that position, don't you, where it's almost like you're interviewing a politician and they're just repeating the party line and not answering your question.
This is a small example of that type of thing where we were in an organization that was in the name of the organization was the word Ontario, and they were having their planning sessions. They always had their planning sessions in another province. And the question was raised by someone, well, why do we always go there? And the answer was, well, they have really nice resorts and they're beautiful resorts and everybody really enjoys this. I said, yep, I didn't, but the conversation evolved into but what about? And then finally somebody said, well, yeah, but you'll go because you like it as much as the rest of us. What's that got to do with it? I think there's a really valid comment going on here that we need to think of something better than because it's really nice and we like it, which was the truth. We did.
It doesn't speak volumes, does it? I mean, it's like, you could put that example in any industry almost, couldn't you? Like a coach who isn't coached, or like a trainer who's never been trained. If you're not sampling or partaking of the goods you're trying to put onto others, then why should they take it? Like,
I mean, if you're a national firm and it says Canada all over your logo and everything else, and on your website it says we're proud to be Canadian, and then you're having all your executive retreats in Las Vegas, or some other nice, warm, sunny place, the Bahamas or whatever, you cannot be surprised when your shareholders or just the public in general are saying, wait a minute. How proud are you of Canada? Walk the walk. These are old words, right? Walk the walk, talk the talk, all those things for leaders.
But, and again, I mean, it links back to ethics. It's definitely an integrity question as well. Hypocrisy, that's a good word for this as well.
Oh, lovely word. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll put the dictionary away. For some people, it's the most difficult question. For others, it's the easiest. We'll see how you get on. If you had the chance to start your career over again, would you do anything differently?
That is a tough question. The honest answer is I don't think so. I was very fortunate for most of my career, and we're not talking about hindsight where I go, that company wasn't good for me, because there's no way of knowing that. So I think that I would not be who I am today without having taken the steps that I took to get to where I am. So I'm actually very content, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. That's always a nice answer to hear to that question as well, I have to say.
Well, I think that if I can, to people that are coming into the, moving through don't be afraid that this is a mistake. Like, everything has a purpose. That sounds kind of, wishy-washy, but it does. We can learn from everything we do. How we respond to things that we don't like is builds character.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think even like at least in the workplace setting, even the worst experience you have at work, at the very least, you will learn how to identify that earlier and avoid it next time. But you'll probably learn a lot more than that from it as well.
That's right, and they'll probably make you a better leader. Because
Definitely.
One of the things I say to people that are in situations where their bosses are, not great or whatever, and we all perceive that. I don't think there's a human being alive that said, every job I've had, the bosses have been great, the supervisors were all wonderful human beings. No. So sometimes that's a perception rather than a reality, but we can still learn. And as a speaker, for example, I learned more from listening to bad speakers than from good speakers, because the good speakers scare me. They are so good. I can't achieve that. So if we see that in our leaders, if we say, I can't be Steve Jobs, or whoever you perceive to be a great leader, I can't do that. It diminishes your sense of ability, right? So when you look around and you say, oh man, that person's in a leadership position, but they're doing that, and that they shouldn't be doing that. You can then refine how you want to behave. Yeah, we want to take the best qualities from the people we look at, not the worst.
There's a lot of value in, as you say, is observing the mistakes of others and knowing not to repeat them. I used to say that I've learned much more from the bad leaders I've worked with or worked for. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think they're second place now. I think the most I've learned from leadership is from my podcast guests. And I'm not just saying that. Genuinely. I mean, we're closing in on 150 episodes now. So it's 150 people that I've met who are experts or have had some really unique and useful insights into leadership. And I learn something every week. So, yeah, they've taken over.
You know why, David, though? Because you're in the unique position of having the conversations with them. Where when we're usually observing leaders, that's all we can do. We may have some interaction with them, but we don't have these lovely discussions to think about it and to really dig deep.
Yeah, true. So we're both very fortunate, I think, with the outcome of that question. There we go.
Leadership Heroes.
All right. Well, it's that time. It's the final question. This one's always my favorite as well.
Uh-oh.
So it's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, that person could be anyone you like. They could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your mind would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that person be and why?
This isn't going to be helpful for your listeners. But the name that comes to mind is one that I personally knew. And I have actually, now you're making my mind broil. I'm thinking of all sorts of other examples, but I'll talk about this one because it was the first to mind. Was Gord Fuller. The name won't mean anything to anyone. And he was the CEO of the Certified General Accountants Association back when I was on their board and coming through the ranks, and was my mentor when I was moving up into the chair president position. He walked the walk. He talked the talk. He was a genuine, warm human being who cared about people, who understood his organization inside out, and who was constantly looking around to see what else was going on in the world. He didn't rely on what he did yesterday or last week. He brought out the best in people. He cared about his employees. He really wanted other people to succeed, and he was humble without ever being disingenuous, that kind of humble that's fake. No. He just honestly would defer to other people and to recognize that most of us don't do it by ourselves, right? I mean, it's sort of that trope, right? Oh, without this team, but sometimes it's genuinely meant, and that's what Gord Fuller was. He was such a wonderful mentor.
Oh, lovely. I always love stories like that. I think, yeah, I mean, the ones with the personal connection, I've often said they're the more meaningful choices. But I think where they are of most benefit is in the second part of this question, isn't it? Is why? Why have you chosen that person? And then that story behind it and what they were like to work for as a leader and all of those nice little facts and memories that come out. And I think there's so much to be learned from those examples too. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, that's, thank you for asking. I'm feeling all warm and fuzzy from my relationship that I had over the years with Gord.
Oh, that's nice as well. Great. Well, we're pretty much out of time. Not that there was a fixed time necessarily, but we've run out of conversation, perhaps, maybe not.
No, I don't think so, David. But I think perhaps for your purpose, we have, I would love an opportunity to chat again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah, me as well. I'll phrase it like this then. It's the natural point to end an episode on. There we go. That's a fairer way of saying it. So one final little question that I would ask you is, if any of the listeners want to learn more about you or what you do, where can they go? What's the website or other means?
The website is www.bzmind.ca.
Okay, lovely. Yeah. I'll put that link in the episode description so everyone can find it easily as well. Michelle, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation, excellent discussion, really enjoyed it, and it's been lovely meeting you as well. So all that's left for me to say is thank you and have a great rest of your day.
And you too, David. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you once more to Michelle for a lively and thought-provoking chat there. I think we both managed to get the other one thinking hard there on some of these topics, and I really enjoyed digging into the depth of problems like ethics, like fairness, right and wrong, critical thinking, dealing with those grey areas as well. And listener or viewer, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope it was thought-provoking for you as well. Please do visit Michelle's website to learn more about what she does and some of the discussion points from this episode. You will find that link, as always, in the episode notes, the show notes, description, whatever you want to call it. So yes, as I do every week, I encourage you to click on that link. Ethical leadership has been a big talking point for us today. It is, of course, a crucial component of any modern approach to leading people. And that's why it is also a core element of leading with integrity. So if you would like to learn more about that, gain access to more leadership resources, as well as early access to these very podcast episodes, then you can click one of those other links in the notes below, or just visit www.leadernotaboss.com. Once you get to that page, click on that green button and you can sign up for my Integrity Leaders online community. It's for new leaders, first-time founders, and managers who want to learn. There's also a 50% off discount code exclusive to listeners of the podcast. You'll find that in the show notes below too. Thank you for listening. Join my next guest and I next week when I'll be talking about what great leadership, great culture, and winning teams look like and how to create them with Scott Allen. That's all from me today. Talk to you again soon, and until then, be a leader, not a boss.